Pablo, good to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat with me. I'm really pleased that you've offered to come and have a chat because you've just written a really interesting book, and I think people will be very interested to hear about what's in it. So, just to kick off, though, I mean, just how did you get a gig writing a book about ethics? Let's just start with that.
Great question, and thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me. Well, I suppose, it's been bobbing on quite a long time. So I had the idea 8 years ago
Right.
of, well, I've got a book. That thing. You've got a book. I've got a
Yeah.
book of me.
Yeah.
What's it really about? And I've worked in public sector, private sector, startups. I've had a range, and I've worked in across three different, industrial sectors of education, creative, and finance. So I had a lot of different perspectives, and so I came up with the idea I'm going to write a book about what's the point of business, what's its role in our society, sort of big picture stuff. And then I started a social enterprise which kind of took over my life for 5 years, and I sort of left it to one side. And then when I was coming out of that and starting to think about, well, what do I do next? I thought I'm done with startups. I've had a belly full of that, which has been pretty good overall, but it's hard
Hard
yards. And I
one.
thought I'm ready for the book now. And then so I went out to publishers, and I must have spoken to, or I have to say, written to 10 publishers, mainly major publishers.
Right.
And I was just on the point of going hybrid publishing, which is basically where you drive it. You pay for somebody to print it and edit it, and a lot of people do it that way. And then Pearson FT, big publisher, big business book publisher, said actually we might be interested. And 12 months of toing and froing led to them saying, actually, we've got this FT guide series. And strangely, this was 2004, 2000, early 2005. We haven't got a book on business ethics. Strange but true.
Right.
Would you like to write it? So it was slightly different to my brief. And there's the anything has to be the comprehensive guide to business ethics. We don't do half-hearted. And I thought, I'll take that challenge. And that's what I've got now, the
Well,
Financial Times Guide to Business Ethics, the
well,
comprehensive guide,
right.
that's how it came out.
Pretty cool. Let's just dig into that then. So
Yeah.
for the people, I mean, let's just start right at the beginning. I mean, what is this ethics thing anyway? I mean, just map that out for us to start with, and then we'll get into the why of it in a minute.
Yeah.
When people talk about ethics, what do they mean?
They mean all sorts of things. And look, and I read, a lot of books to kind of prepare and research for it. And often it means something to do with compliance, staying legal, meeting the regulations, not getting into trouble and getting out of trouble when you're in it. That's kind of end of ethics. And that's fine. And I write a bit about that as well. But there's plenty of literature out there. But when I sat, so I chose to make it a collaborative episode. I went out and spoke to 50 chief execs, and I asked them exactly that question. I said, and it was like, I asked them, what do you mean by ethical leadership?
Mm,
And give me an example of how that played out. And then and those case studies are in the book. And it drew out a much broader definition of ethics. And probably the most common thing I heard, well, it's just doing the right thing, doing the right thing.
right. Yep.
And that's fine. And I can work with that. Some talk about responsible business, and the word ethics itself, it doesn't feature very often. You don't sit around boardrooms going, oh, is this ethical? It's not a very common question.
Yeah.
So I went with that, doing the right thing. But of course, doing the right thing is subjective. You and I might agree on many things, but there might be some grey areas that go, no,
Well,
that's not the,
I mean,
yeah,
just to give a current example, I mean, Donald Trump obviously
yeah,
thinks he's doing the right thing. His supporters think he's doing the right thing. I
exactly.
don't, and
Yeah,
quite a few other people don't. I mean, it's a
yeah.
contested area, isn't it?
It is a contested area. And so when you define ethics in that broad terms of doing the right thing, you get into also, and I went into moral philosophy, moral psychology, how to do it.
Yeah.
The fact is, there are no absolutes. You know, Murder's a bad thing, isn't it? But if somebody threatens my kids, the gloves are off. So there's no absolutes. There's it's kind of fundamental to being human. So back to business. So what does that mean in business terms? There were three big themes came out when I dug into what does that really mean? Your question, which was in no particular order. There was one to do with the environment. To what extent is my business responsible for what happens in
Yeah.
the environment,
Yeah.
costing and externalities, all that stuff. Different views. Some people take it very seriously. Some people say, well, it's no, it's a tick box in the background. That's one side of it. The second one, again, a major one, is what I term social equity, which in simple terms is how do you take care of your staff? How do you take care of the communities that you work in? And how do you take care of communities that are somewhere down the line in your supply chain? And is that just about, driving down the lowest
Mhm.
price, or is it something else? And then the third area, which is the hot area, if you like, because those are sort of well-traveled areas of corporate activity, corporate social responsibility, and so on. The third area is emerging technology, AI in particular, but
Yeah.
not just that, so other things coming along. We've got quantum computing, we've got biotechnology, we've got all sorts of things coming down the pipe that come into play into the area of how business operate. And though a lot of that is early days, so it's a chance to think, well, what have we learned about how we do things in the past? Can we do it better next time?
Mm.
So those three big areas, and the principle I landed on, and my book isn't telling people what to think. I don't say, you've got to be environmentally positive or you've got to take care of everybody no matter what. I just say, look, this is how you think about it. The where I landed was if you haven't got a clear position, and if you want to turn that to policy, that's why I remember a clear position on what you think about those three areas, then you're going to get into trouble at some stage. You've got to be clear what you stand for,
Yeah.
and don't say one thing and do another. And that's the basics of ethics for me.
Okay. I mean, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense. Because the other thing that strikes me about it is that it's an evolving agenda, isn't it? Let me ask you that last thing you were talking about. I mean, what you were basically saying is that the intent of leaders, what leaders are trying to do, their position on things, their perspective, their viewpoints, if you
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
those things are important. I mean, why is that important? Just explain why does the intent of leaders in relation to ethics matter?
Yeah, well, it's and this comes back to sort of one aspect of the book, which was, they looked at both sides, where there's a risk side to it and there's an
Mm.
opportunity side to it. So the opportunity side, particularly, so some businesses that I observed get competitive advantage, and I tried to dig in under, well, what's behind that? What makes the difference between a business that's just a good business and is making a
Mm.
profit and is, okay, and one that people say, well, actually, they've got an ethical edge. And really, it comes down to in what you're asking about is why is it taking that particular position? So if I'm running a business and I decide, oh, my customers are worried about the environment, so I'll, tick a few boxes, get a few credentials, put it out there, and I'll win more business. That's fine. That's not competitive advantage from what I found. Whereas if I have a personal view or something to do with the history of my business or the roots of my business or the real culture of the business, which says, look, in fact, take an example. Let me take an example, which is, let's move away from environment. There's a lot of talk about that. Your people. How do you look after your people? One business I spoke to was set up during the Crimean War to take care of war veterans.
Mm.
And at the time, war vets would come back from the war and nobody really, there wasn't a welfare state. This was, 19th century, and they were just kind of left to be taken care of their community or not.
Mm.
So somebody set up initially a charity, then it became a business to take care of them. So when the chief exec came into position, this was about 5 years ago, they were losing money, they were in trouble, they were losing market share. And the way they took care of war vets was to give them jobs as commissionaires, as security officers at the front of buildings, typically. And they were losing market share to the big players, to the, Sercos, Capitals of this world. And it was a race to the bottom, who can be
Yeah.
cheapest. So the chief exec losing money, what do you do? So typically you kind of, oh, well, we'll cut the costs and try and kind of muddle through and hope we kind of get back out the other side. So he didn't do that. He looked back to the history and said, what are we really here to do? What's the point of our business? And the point was actually to take care of our staff. And not many businesses would take that as, look, this is my priority. I'm taking care of my staff. How do I do that? So he then started looking at ways that he could say, well, we actually don't pay our staff very well. We're paying minimum wage. What if we paid living wage? A couple of pounds an hour extra. What if we figured out how that could translate into value for customers so they'd be happy to work with us, maybe look at pricing, And anyway, that's what he did. A long story short, he turned it around. He turned it around by going right back to why we're here as an organization. And now when he talks to customers, he says, I'm not actually focused on you. I'm focused on my people. That's the kind of organization we are. My people look after you. That's where you get the service. You don't get it from the chief exec. And he's very clear about that. And because he's so clear about it, it's driven all the changes, all the positive, and that's translated into business value. So that's an example of what I mean
Okay.
about,
Okay.
where it's the why, not just the what.
Yeah. And that's a very popular theory at the moment, isn't it? I mean, focus on the why. I mean, that's there's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of those sort of discussions around.
There
There,
are, yeah, yeah.
there are also counter examples. I mean, I was talking to what you might describe as an ethical business. I mean, they were focused on the environment the other day, and they're
Yeah,
really struggling because all their competitors are pushing price down, and they're saying, "Well, look, we'll do it in an ethical way, and invite a better
yeah,
way for the
yeah,
environment," but they're still losing money. So,
yeah.
I mean, I take your points, but it's easy to say. It's not necessarily so easy to do, and there are lots of examples where it doesn't work. So it would be my
Yeah,
counter to that.
yeah.
Let me come back to something we were talking about a second ago, though.
But can I say, do you mind if I say, just to,
Go
because the
on. Yeah.
why isn't the whole picture. I mean, this is the point. So the why's great, and
Mm.
I'm sure, sort of they're lovely, well-intentioned people, but actually the lining up your business model to that why, if that's not creating value, then that's not a business. And, for
Yeah.
me, the clue's in the name, business ethics. You've got to do both.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come back to that. I want to
All right.
come back to that
Yeah.
in a bit. I mean, because it's a very interesting area. I mean, my basic point is you can see examples where that's worked. It's much more difficult to say to somebody, do that and it will work. That's the point. But I want to come back to
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Let me just come back to something we talked about earlier on. This idea that because customer expectations change, I mean, in my view, they only ever go up. Um, that means your kind of the way you manage the business needs to change because you have to take
Yes,
account of customer expectations, which means ethics evolve.
yes,
Yeah, just tell people. I mean, let's just explore that evolutionary process. I mean, ethics. I don't know. When I started in business 45, 50 years ago, they had a different feel to them to the way they do now. I mean, just talk about that way ethics has evolved.
yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, look, business doesn't work in a vacuum.
Mm,
It's business is licensed by society, to create a, limited liability company to enable you to risk your capital and
mm,
create some value and make a profit. And, you've got a set of stakeholders that benefit from all that. So that pressure in from the outside world. So ethics isn't a fixed point. It's because some people think ethics, well, that's doing the right thing. There's right and there's wrong, and we've got to work out what the right thing is, and we just do that. It's not like that. Ethics is like quality. Ethics is more like a
mm.
kind of a cycle of questioning, learning, and improving, and that never stops. It really
I
doesn't.
I think, sorry, just to pick up that point, I mean, I agree with you about that, but it's also, I mean, ethics is also about customer perception. I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whether you're considered to be ethical depends on whether your customers think what you're doing is ethical. So,
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
equally, whether they think it's unethical. So
Yep.
it is about process, but it's also about perception.
Yeah, it is, and this is a kind of another feature of
Mm,
the businesses that achieve competitive advantage is that they let people know very clearly what they stand for, and then they follow through on it. So that if customers don't agree with that, then they've got clarity of right, that's what you stand for, and I am or I'm not going to buy your product or service. So, and I'm seeing a growth in the market for standards that help you to badge up your business and say, you're a B Corp or you're fair trade
mm.
or you're a living wage employer, that kind of thing.
To what extent, though, is that? And again, there's a challenge there. To what extent is that virtue signaling? Is that saying to people, "We're a B Corp, you can trust us ethically"? Is that really about saying to customers, "You should come to us because we're ethical," rather than go to the competition? So, is it really virtue signaling? Because that's where you find a lot of the greenwashing stuff going on, isn't it? People saying,
Yeah,
"Oh, we're doing stuff, we're being green, we're focusing on net zero," and then you lift the hood. and all of a sudden discover that it's not quite that simple.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. No, it's not about the badge. It's about how you follow through, and that's the
Yeah.
point. Again, it's you may have great intention, but then the machinery's actually got to deliver it. So I mean, a great example of that is Brewdog. Brewdog was a B Corp, and
Yeah.
it celebrated it, and it said, "Look at us, we're just fabulous. We're green. We've got great credentials." And then suddenly, somebody pulled a thread, and I don't know if it was Glassdoor or one of those kind of, how people feel about working Brewdog. It turned out to be a culture of, in simple terms, greenwashing.
And
It
abuse,
was, it
actually.
was,
Yeah.
and abuse. It's bullying
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So very quickly, within 12 months, they had to, what's the word, that lovely euphemism? They had to step back from their B
Yeah.
Corp so that they could stop paying a living wage, go back to minimum wage, cut the costs. The founders left under, questions about what they were really doing. And, they've been in losses for 5 years. And for all I know, I don't know if I mean, I still see their stuff on the shelves, but, they're a business in deep trouble. So that's a great example of what you're saying, which is when you don't do it properly, increasingly you do get found out because we're a very transparent world. You can't
Mm.
pretend that you're this and do that. It's much harder to do that than when you and I started business in, 400 years ago, or sorry, it was less in your case.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting area. You see. I mean, I've been following the BrewDog thing, and
Yeah,
what's one of the things that's really interesting is that the business nearly went bust, and lots of staff and investors lost a lot of money.
yeah,
The founders walked away with lots.
yeah,
So there are very powerful incentives to deceive, it seems to me. And that is one of the things that I think that is worrying about these things. And to come back to your point about transparency, without absolute transparency, you create the opportunity for people to get rich by deceiving people, which is totally unethical. But you can see why
yeah,
that incentive occurs. And being an economist, I'm always interested to see what the incentives are. So
yeah.
lots of issues there, aren't there?
There are lots of issues, and one of the CEOs I spoke to was Simon Rogerson, the CEO of Octopus Group, and he says this publicly and widely. He said 90% of businesses are sociopaths,
Yeah.
um, and he's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but he's not far wrong. When you're stood on a queue of your customer is important to us. You're held in a queue and you'll be answered shortly. You know that 90% of the time that's not really true. And that kind of behavior, there is space in our economic model for a lot of organizations to be successful in that way. And they may be trading on something else. They may be trading on, yeah, but we're offering the lowest price, or we're the most convenient, or we've got, the best marketing machine that convinces you
Or a
that we're the
mix of
best
all
place,
those things, like
or
Amazon.
all those things. So exactly.
Mm,
So it's I'm not saying it's because if ethics was really the silver bullet in the current economic system, then everybody would be doing it, and you wouldn't need my book. So I'm saying, look, there's at the margin, it is the margin. This is a minority sport. B Corp is only 10,000 businesses. Fair Trade's only been going for 50 years, and only 50,000 businesses. That this is still minority. All I'm saying is there is competitive advantage and the dial is moving because your point, transparency, there is more transparency. There is Trustpilot. There is, the ethical consumer app. There are now more and more ways of looking under the bonnet,
mm.
and new generations, they're less loyal to brands than we were sort of from, a few decades ago. They do look under the bonnet. And so businesses aren't getting found out.
Mm, mm. Let me come back to the transparency thing. I mean, one of the things we talked about the other week was this idea that part of the ethical thing is about educating customers, because you just pointed
Yeah,
out a complicated area. So
yeah,
you've got to educate them. You've got to educate customers. Well, my question is, do you need to educate customers? Because I mean, if I was to go to somebody and say, what do you feel you need to be educated about? I think it's highly unlikely they're going to say,
yeah,
I need
yeah,
to
yeah,
be educated about ethics. That's something that I
yeah,
really feel I need to learn about.
yeah,
I mean, let's just talk that issue through. This idea of educating the customers and
yeah,
how that sits with transparency, which is just saying this is what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah,
Educating is more about the why I'm doing it. I mean, just
yeah.
just explore that issue and why do you feel that's important?
Yeah, no, it isn't. But I mean, look at and it's an old kind of, marketing and sales chestnut, isn't it? Is,
Yeah.
how do your customers know what's really going on? Your credibility, your credentials, don't ask us, ask other people who've done business with us. I think it's just more pressure now in that system. So that if I go out blowing my own trumpet saying I've got a great service and it's super ethical and the price is fair and 2 years down the line you won't regret it. There's more ways now of checking that out. So you've got to pedal a lot harder
Mm.
to make your case and show your credibility. Um, and is that, I mean, I know we talked about before about educating customers. I mean, education is quite a big word, because that sounds like that's a major commitment from the customer to sit and listen to you for long enough to find out how real you are. And we all know, the world's a sort of busy digital
Yeah.
marketplace.
Yeah.
You haven't got a lot of space and time to get your message across. You just need to make sure that it runs deep because, you might fool some of the customers some of the time. And that's really the argument. The
Mm.
point about education is also about the reality behind the rhetoric.
Mm. I mean, it's a really interesting area, and I hear that a lot from CEOs that I speak to that say, one of my jobs is to educate the customers about what
Yeah.
the thing is. And I always think in one sense, they're asking the wrong question. A better question to ask is, what is it that customers would like to learn about?
Mm.
What will make their world better in a learning experience, and how does what you do relate to what they might want to
Yeah, yeah,
learn about, which is a
yeah,
slightly different from things because education says about, well, this is what you need to
yeah,
learn,
yeah, yeah. It's
rather
about
than saying
push.
what
Yeah,
is it
yeah,
you want to learn about and how can we help you.
yeah, yeah,
A
yeah,
slightly different thing, I think.
yeah,
But to come back to what we were talking about earlier on, I mean, this whole issue about customer expectations, isn't it? I mean, it is undoubtedly the case that ethical behavior is more important than it was. But it's not important to all consumers, which I think is the other interesting part.
yeah. It isn't, and we a lot of us take things at face value, and just my experience of working on this book and now talking about it. This is probably 3 years on. I look at businesses differently because I
In
look.
what way do you look at them differently? I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, why do you say that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me give you one thing I discovered relatively recently. It's not in the book. It was after I published it. There's an organization called CCLA which advises ethical investors effectively
Yeah.
about what sits behind the under the bonnet. And one thing that really caught my eye was the fact that about 200 years ago we said that slavery was a bad idea and we're going to make it illegal and and that and most countries have followed suit on that. But then 10 years ago, we introduced the Modern Slavery Act, and I realise now the reason that we did that was that it really wasn't working. I mean, there are now more slaves in the world than there were
Yeah.
200 years ago,
Yeah. It's
and
ironic, isn't it?
it is all right. And the so what that tells me two things, which is one, whatever it is we did didn't work. And the second thing is, what's really driving it is there's good business to be had by having, you know, close to zero cost labor somewhere down the supply chain.
Mm.
It's a business driver, and business has to look at itself for that.
Yeah.
So we've got the Modern Slavery Act, and large businesses have to fully comply, and smart smaller businesses also choose to do that in the right way. Um, but compliance is very heavily about having a policy and effectively self-reporting on are we following our policy. The actual downstream impact of that, which is what CCLA look at, and there are others as well that look into it, um, is a very different picture. So, for example, by their report, if you're a typical large business in the UK, you achieve on their scale of impact of reducing slavery, you achieve about 60%. You're compliant in the law, but you're only 60% effective. If you're a FTSE company, you're even less, you're 45% effective.
Mm.
So that said to me, and I'm bothered by that. I don't,
Mm.
why would we kind of collude with slavery? So now when I'm dealing with a business, whether from a B2B point of view or as a consumer, I kind of have a look at, well, what are their slavery credentials? I don't look at their website because that'll tell me it's all fine. I look at people looking in on it,
Mm.
and there are, and it's so I mean there's one, the ethical consumer app is interesting. It's quite controversial. It's got quite kind of
Mm.
some political views that you may not agree with, but it does look at those things and it looks under the bonnet. And you can very quickly look up any brand. It's particularly for consumers, and you very quickly work out, well, what are they really doing? What are they doing about tax havens? What are they doing about slavery? What are they doing about, how they treat their staff and so on?
I mean, the other interesting one I
You know,
think is the clothing industry. I mean, there's a lot of
yeah,
clothing businesses that talk about being ethically sound and
yeah,
recycling and what have you. But we've still got millions of tons of used clothing
yeah, we do.
being dumped in other parts of the world that comes from our economy. It's been shipped overseas and dumped in
Yeah, and it's
South
it's a
America.
consumer. I was talking to young people yesterday, and they said, what they asked me a question. They said, are we going to get more ethical? And I said, well, I don't know. It's up to you. You've got more years in you than I have. So, what choices are you making? Do you buy your clothes from Primark or Zara or, do you know sort of where that comes from? Is it more important for you to pay, 10 quid for something that's in fashion or hold back, save up your money and pay 30 quid for something that's got, some good ethical credentials behind it? That's your choice. And I think I know it feels like, oh, that's only one thing. Actually, consumer pressure really does make a difference. We know there have been movements in the past that have put pressure on businesses,
Mm.
and things like that are, and young people do think about it. They are curious about
Mm.
it, and more so than, people of our generation.
It'd be interesting to see what sort of impact that has over time, actually.
Yeah, indeed.
Probably won't be here to see it, but it'd be an interesting thing to hang around.
You you and I
Um,
might not, but maybe the kids and grandkids.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me ask you about a couple of things. I mean, let's just touch on what you've learned from the experience. I mean, you've been sort of thinking about this for quite a long time. You spent
Yeah.
a chunk of time researching and writing the book. I mean, when you look back on that journey, I mean, what have you learned?
I suppose it's well right at the beginning. So I said to my wife, I'm going to write this book, and I wrote a couple of chapters, and she's a social scientist,
Mm.
um and she read them, and she went, hmm. Do you know anybody else who's got any opinions about this? She wasn't that impressed. And I went, well, actually, I do. I've got a great network. And that's where it all started. I said, well, I'll talk to other people. So, so one thing I found when I started going out to my network to CEOs, other business leaders across, public, private, third sectors, um, there was this thirst, this hunger. People were running at me to say, yeah, yeah, no, I want to talk to you. Yeah, I want to go. And with a couple of exceptions, because, the deal was I spoke to them, I wrote down what they said, I played it back, and I said, you've got full editorial control. These are your words. It's going to be in the public domain. A couple said, actually, I've got a bit too far. You can't print that. A few more said you can, but it's got to be anonymized. And that's, particularly in some of the section on temptation, that's an anonymous section.
Yeah.
The point is, there was this thirst to talk about it, this desire. So yeah, I really want to talk about it. I really want to talk about my dilemmas. I want to talk about, there's some hero stories of things that I did despite the prevailing culture. There are some dilemma stories of, I was tempted to be a whistleblower, but I couldn't be because it would risk my livelihood. Really kind of crunchy experiences. And it just sits under the carpet. And that's what I felt is that, and now when I'm talking to people, people they want to engage there. As you're asking those questions, they're curious. They want to know why don't we talk more about it? And I'm finding this rich seam of place to discuss. And the truth is, the other thing I learned is we haven't really got a common language about it. We've got a common language of economics. We know what profit and share price and asset value, and we can all argue about, what the, accounting standards are and all that jazz. But actually, we're comfortable with that because it's nice and quantitative. Whereas ethics is very qualitative. And I said this kind of cycle of questioning, learning, and improving. It's more subtle, it's more nuanced, and it's more personally challenging. So it's a more difficult subject to talk about. For me, it's emerged that it's equally important. You've got to have business is about having an economic model, but fundamentally it's about trust. We've got to have a language for being able to talk about trust. And it takes some effort and it takes some personal commitment. And it's harder to separate yourself personally from that to say, well, this is me at home and me at work. You've got to be all in on it. So it's more demanding and challenging, particularly of CEOs.
Yeah. And what's your take on the kind of direction of travel? I mean, you've looked at a lot of the stuff that's gone in the past and talked to
Yeah.
people about what they're doing now. I mean, what's your take on how this is going to evolve? I know that's a difficult question, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we touched on one of the things we touched on is the impact that things like AI are having.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what's your take on, and that, you know, it's going to change a lot of things, isn't it? I mean, what's your take on how things are going to play out in the next year or two?
Well, look, I think it's things like AI, things like the US administration, it's bringing the subject to the fore. So now it's
Mm.
definitely in the foreground. If we're talking about AI now on that subject, I hear ethics in the first or second sentence.
Yeah,
And that's interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
We're
yeah.
kind of saying, is this okay? Are we replacing jobs? Are we replacing ourselves completely? What does that really mean? There's environmental aspects to it as well. I mean, it's got a whole. So ethics is now more prominent because it's contentious, because there's things that are challenging us. Um, so I think that's a positive thing. Getting through that to say, so I'm not predicting any kind of major global consensus anytime soon.
Mm.
I'm not sure we'd want that. You want the debate, you want the fire of
Mm.
having the, what's this mean? What's this
Different
work for
views,
us?
but different views.
Different views. Um, and I think for CEOs now, and look, the CEO job is a tough job. You've got all the stakeholders and it's not in balance. Your job is to put the stakeholders in balance. You've got to build that trust. And I hear more and more CEOs, and when they're coming to talk to me, to say, this is hard stuff. How do I figure it out? That's a positive thing. And usually step one is, well, how are you discussing that with your teams? Whatever size of your organization, that's your resource for this.
Mm.
You can test it out internally before you go to the outside world. It involves a different kind of leadership skill, which is asking, I'm not sure about this. What do you think?
Mm.
And leaders are not always comfortable saying that because they feel they've got to have the answers. And this is an area where they really don't.
Mm.
They may have, if they're smart, they've got a conscience, they've got some self-awareness. They know this is where I stand on it in principle, and then in practice, I've got to test that out. So I see those conversations happening more. I see a sense of discomfort in that. Um, I think ultimately it's good for all of us because if business are joining in with, well, what's good, what's right, and are making that explicit and saying, this is what I stand for, are you with me or not? And the business flourishes, it means it's flourishing in rich soil, not in something where it's going to,
Yeah, yeah,
have a starburst and then go bust in 5 years with the founders walking off with a nice few million in their pockets.
yeah. Pablo, thank you for making a bit of time to come talk about. I mean, whichever way it shakes down, it's going to be an interesting few years. Would be my take on it. And AI, you know, is going to heat that debate up. I think, you know, because it presents so many more challenges to people. And I think
It does.
your point about being curious and asking questions is a really
Yeah.
important one. I mean,
Yeah.
we really don't want to lose sight of that because there are no easy answers. It's you know it's if it was easy to fix, it would have been fixed. If you
We'd
wouldn't
have done it already. But that's the joy of business, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, never ending game, isn't it?
it's never any game and we're great innovators. And now we get to innovate a bit more in this territory as well. I think it's a nice challenge.
Absolutely. Pablo, thanks for coming on, and I'll speak to you soon.
Real pleasure. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.